My daughter-in-law left her phone on the sofa. Suddenly it started ringing. The name and photo on the screen froze me in place. My love. It was a picture of my husband who died 7 years ago. I opened the message, and what I read made my heart nearly stop. Sunday lunches had been our family tradition since Timothy died. Even with Mark constantly traveling for work, I insisted Paige join me weekly, a feeble attempt to maintain some semblance of family in a house that had grown too quiet. Today had been no different. Pot roast, Timothy's favorite, small talk about Mark's latest business trip to Singapore, and Paige's polite inquiries about my garden club. I should get these dishes cleaned up, I said, gathering our plates while Paige checked her watch. Let me help, Suzanne. Her slender fingers collected silverware with practiced efficiency. Always helpful, always proper, at least when anyone was watching. No need, dear. Why don't you relax in the living room? There's a new issue of Architectural Digest I thought you might enjoy. She smiled, that perfect, measured smile that never quite reached her eyes. That sounds lovely. I'll just make a quick call first. I watched her retreat to the living room, phone already in hand. 7 years of Sunday lunches, and I still couldn't say I knew my daughter-in-law. Timothy would have known how to bridge that gap. He could connect with anyone, make them feel like the most important person in the world. It was what had made him such a successful businessman, that genuine interest in others. I missed that about him. I missed everything about him. The dishes didn't take long. Years of living alone had made me efficient, if nothing else. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and headed toward the living room to join Paige. Paige, would you like some? The living room was empty, but her designer handbag remained on the armchair. The bathroom door down the hall was closed, the sound of running water filtering through the old house's thin walls. Her phone lay on the sofa cushion, momentarily abandoned. I sat down across from it, reaching for the magazine I'd mentioned. That's when the device lit up with an incoming message, vibrating against the fabric. And there he was. Timothy's face smiled up at me from the screen. Not an old photo I recognized, but one I'd never seen before. His silver hair caught the sunlight, those familiar laugh lines crinkling around his eyes. But it wasn't possible. Timothy had been dead for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Below his image, the notification showed, "My love, can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've made reservations at..." My hand moved without conscious thought, reaching for the phone. A violation of privacy, yes, but overridden by the impossibility staring up at me. With trembling fingers, I swiped the screen. The phone wasn't locked. The message opened fully. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've made reservations at La Maison for 8. Wear that black dress I bought you. And don't worry about your husband. He'll never know what we're planning. Soon, my darling, everything that should have been mine will be ours." My vision blurred. The words swam before me as a wave of nausea crashed through my body. This wasn't possible. Timothy was gone. I'd identified his body, planned his funeral, mourned him every day for 7 years. Yet here was his face, sending romantic messages to my daughter-in-law, mentioning her husband, my son, with casual disdain. I scrolled up through earlier messages, each one more damning than the last. Suzanne suspects nothing. She still wears her wedding ring, poor fool. Mark called. Another 2 weeks in Dubai. We'll have the house to ourselves. I found more documents in Timothy's study. The offshore accounts are exactly where we suspected. Photos appeared between texts. Timothy at locations I didn't recognize, in clothes I'd never seen, always with that familiar smile, but something different in his eyes. Harder, colder, and Paige. Intimate photos I immediately scrolled past, then photos of them together, his arm around her waist, her lips against his cheek. Photos dated just last week. My mind raced for explanations. A cruel prank? Some bizarre catfishing scheme? But the man in these photos was undeniably Timothy, or someone identical to him in every way. Then I saw a message from 3 months ago that made everything horrifyingly clear. Sometimes I can't believe she never knew Timothy had a twin. Identical in every way, except I got all the ambition and none of the silver spoon. But we'll fix that imbalance soon enough, won't we, darling? A twin, an identical twin Timothy never mentioned. The room tilted around me as decades of marriage suddenly contained a massive, unspoken secret. Why would Timothy never tell me he had a brother? How could I not have known? The bathroom door clicked open down the hall. Quickly, I returned to the home screen and placed the phone exactly where Paige had left it. my heart hammering against my ribs. Years of hosting charity galas and business dinners had taught me something about composure. I reached for it now, desperate to hide my discovery. "Sorry about that," Paige said, returning to the living room. "Mark called to check in. He sends his love." Another lie. Mark hadn't called her. He'd called this man who looked like my dead husband, this twin, this stranger who was planning something with my daughter-in-law, something involving Timothy's money, my money, Mark's inheritance. "How nice," I managed, proud that my voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "More coffee? I should actually get going," Paige replied, collecting her phone and slipping it into her purse with casual ease. If she noticed it had moved, her perfect mask revealed nothing. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Not a meeting. A date with my husband's secret twin brother at La Maison at 8 p.m. "Of course, dear. Same time next Sunday?" "Wouldn't miss it." She leaned down to kiss my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering as she pulled away. "You take care of yourself, Suzanne." I walked her to the door, exchanging pleasantries as though my world hadn't just imploded. As her car disappeared down the driveway, I finally allowed myself to collapse into a chair, my entire body shaking. Timothy had a twin brother, an identical twin who was alive and involved with my daughter-in-law. A twin who spoke of things that should have been his and offshore accounts and plans that my son would never know about. Memories flooded back. Timothy's unexpected trip just months before his fatal heart attack. His distracted demeanor when he returned. The way he'd dismiss my questions with uncharacteristic abruptness. Had he discovered this brother then? Had something happened between them? I reached for the phone, my phone, and hesitated. Who could I call? Mark was halfway around the world. The police? And tell them what? That my dead husband's secret twin brother was having an affair with my daughter-in-law? That they were plotting something involving family money? No. Before I involved anyone else, I needed more information. I needed to understand what I was facing. Timothy always said I was stronger than I looked. Steel wrapped in silk, he'd called me. After 40 years of marriage to one of Boston's shrewdest businessmen, I'd learned a thing or two about strategic thinking, about patience, about waiting for the right moment to act. If Paige and this imposter thought I was a grieving widow, too blinded by loss to see what was happening right in front of me, they were about to learn otherwise. I glanced at Timothy's portrait above the fireplace, the one taken on our 30th anniversary. "Looks like you kept secrets, my love," I whispered to his smiling face. "Now I need to uncover them all." For a woman who prided herself on keen observation, I'd never felt more blind. 7 years of widowhood, 43 years of marriage before that, and somehow I'd missed that my husband, the man I believed I knew better than anyone, had harbored a secret of this magnitude, an identical twin. I spent Sunday night in Timothy's study, a room I'd preserved almost exactly as he'd left it. His leather chair still held the subtle impression of his form. His favorite fountain pen remained capped beside the blotter. Even his reading glasses rested on top of financial quarterlies he would never finish reviewing. I'd kept this room as a shrine, telling myself it was for Mark, for memories. Now I wondered if I'd simply been avoiding the pain of truly letting go. The wall of built-in bookcases housed Timothy's meticulously organized files and personal documents. If there was any evidence of this twin, it would be here. I started methodically, working through each drawer of his desk, each shelf of personal papers, tax returns, insurance policies, our children's birth certificates. Nothing unusual. Around midnight, I found the first thread to pull. In a leather portfolio marked Personal Timothy Mitchell, I discovered adoption papers. Timothy had been adopted at 6 weeks old by the Mitchells, the wealthy Boston family whose name he'd carried with such pride. This wasn't entirely surprising. He'd mentioned his adoption occasionally, though we rarely discussed it. What caught my attention was the birth mother's name, Elizabeth Winters, and a notation, twin boys, separated at birth. My hands trembled as I spread the yellowed document on the desk. No mention of the other child's placement, no name for Timothy's brother. Just confirmation that somewhere out there, another baby had entered the world alongside my husband, then been sent in a different direction. Beneath the adoption papers lay a slim folder I'd never seen before, labeled simply LR. Inside was a private investigator's report dated 3 months before Timothy's death, containing a name, Lawrence Reeves, current address in Baltimore, employment history, criminal record, multiple fraud charges, though nothing that had resulted in significant jail time, and photographs. The resemblance stole my breath. Had I passed this man on the street, I would have thrown my arms around him without a moment's hesitation, believing he was Timothy. The same strong jawline, the same silver-streaked dark hair, identical smile lines around the eyes. Only in the eyes themselves could I detect something different. A hardness where Timothy's had held warmth. Or perhaps I was seeing what I wanted to see, creating differences to preserve the memory of the man I loved. The final page held a handwritten note in Timothy's distinctive script. Meeting arranged for March 15th. Will not inform family until I determine if relationship is advisable. Concerning background suggests caution. March 15th, just 2 weeks before Timothy's fatal heart attack. I sat back, connecting pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Timothy had discovered his twin brother, arranged a meeting, and then, what? Something had gone badly wrong. So wrong that Timothy had chosen to keep this monumental discovery from me, from Mark, from everyone. And now this man, this Lawrence Reeves, was romantically involved with Paige, planning something that involved Timothy's money, my money. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night creating a timeline, mapping the connections I could verify and the questions that remained. By dawn, my determination had crystallized into a plan. If Lawrence and Paige were meeting tonight at La Maison at Étoile, I needed to see this twin with my own eyes, needed to understand what I was facing. I called my closest friend, Eleanor, who'd stood beside me through Timothy's funeral and the long gray years that followed. Ellie, I need a favor. No questions asked. Her response was immediate. Name it. I need a table at La Maison tonight. Somewhere discreet where I can observe other diners without being easily noticed. To her credit, Eleanor didn't press for explanations. After 50 years of friendship, she understood when matters were serious. My nephew is the maitre d' there. I'll call him right now. Thank you. And Ellie, I may need to borrow Sophia for the evening. Sophia was Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, a dignified Filipino woman approximately my height and build. Suzanne, what on earth? No questions. Remember? I promise I'll explain everything soon. With Eleanor's help, arrangements fell into place. By 7 o'clock, I was seated at a corner table at La Maison, partially concealed by an ornamental ficus. I'd borrowed Sophia's uniform and identity, adding a dark wig and glasses that significantly altered my appearance. The restaurant's management had been told that Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell was considering the venue for a charity event and wished to observe discreetly how the staff handled regular service. La Maison was Timothy's favorite restaurant. We'd celebrated anniversaries here, Mark's graduation, business successes. The irony wasn't lost on me that Lawrence had chosen this particular establishment for his rendezvous with Paige. Was he deliberately walking in my husband's footsteps, trying to assume his identity in more ways than one? At precisely 8:05 they arrived. I'd prepared myself for the shock of seeing Timothy's face on another man, but reality hit harder than anticipation. Lawrence wore a charcoal suit nearly identical to one in Timothy's closet, his silver hair styled the same way, even his posture mirroring my husband's confident stance. Had he studied Timothy, or were these similarities embedded in shared DNA? Paige clung to his arm, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, presumably the one Lawrence had mentioned buying her. She looked radiant, happier than I'd seen her in years, more alive than she ever appeared at our Sunday lunches or family gatherings. They were seated across the restaurant, but from my vantage point, I could observe them clearly. The intimate way she leaned toward him, how his hand covered hers on the table. Their conversation appeared intense, punctuated by shared smiles and occasional laughter. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to observe analytically rather than emotionally. This wasn't Timothy. This was a stranger wearing his face, a stranger with criminal tendencies who had targeted my family. As they ordered wine, I slipped the small directional microphone Eleanor had procured from her security-obsessed husband from my purse. The device, paired with a wireless earpiece, wouldn't catch every word, but it might give me critical information. Papers are all in the safe at her house, Lawrence was saying, Timothy's voice emerging from his lips. The old fool still hasn't changed the combination. Timothy's birthday, can you imagine? Paige laughed softly. She keeps everything exactly as it was when he died. It's like a mausoleum in there. Well, the combination works in our favor. I found documents for the Cayman accounts last week when you had her at that garden club luncheon. My stomach clenched. They'd been in my safe, in Timothy's safe. the one concealed behind his portrait in the study. And Mark suspects nothing? Lawrence asked, sipping his wine. Timothy's preferred vintage, I noted. Mark barely knows what continent he's on. He's been to the house 3 times in the past 6 months. Paige's tone held undisguised contempt. Besides, he trusts me completely. And Suzanne still treats me like the gold-digging trophy wife who isn't good enough for her precious son. She has no idea we even know each other. Lawrence smiled, Timothy's smile, but somehow wrong on his face. Perfect. Once we have the account numbers verified, we can move to phase 2. 4 more weeks, darling, and Timothy's fortune will be where it always should have been, with his firstborn son. Firstborn son? The wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. Lawrence wasn't just Timothy's twin. He was claiming to be the firstborn. By what, minutes perhaps? And in his mind, that entitled him to everything Timothy had built. What had happened at that meeting 7 years ago? What had Timothy discovered about his brother that he'd taken to his grave? As they clinked glasses, celebrating their scheme, a cold clarity settled over me. I needed to understand exactly what they were planning, how far they were willing to go, and most urgently, what Lawrence meant by firstborn son. But one thing was certain. The man wearing my husband's face and the woman married to my son were conspiring to steal my family's legacy, and I would not let that happen. I spent Tuesday morning in the vault at Mitchell Holdings, reviewing documents I hadn't touched in years. As Timothy's widow and the company's majority shareholder, I had unlimited access, though I'd largely left business operations to the executive team since his death. Today, I needed to understand exactly what Lawrence and Paige might be targeting. Mrs. Mitchell, is there anything specific I can help you locate? Asked Gerald Barnes, the company's chief financial officer who'd worked alongside Timothy for 20 years. Just familiarizing myself with our current holdings, Gerald. It's been too long since I took an active interest. I smiled placidly, projecting nothing but casual curiosity. Of course, please let me know if you need anything. He hesitated at the door. It's good to see you here again. Timothy would be pleased. Once alone, I methodically examined the offshore accounts Lawrence had mentioned. Timothy had established several in the Cayman Islands during the company's expansion in the 1990s, all perfectly legal, if tax advantageous. What caught my attention were the access protocols. While most company accounts required multiple authorizations for large transfers, these particular accounts had been set up with simpler verification systems, a vulnerability if someone had the right information. I made careful notes, then turned to Timothy's personal files. His will had been straightforward. Everything to me, with provisions for Mark to inherit upon my death. Standard estate planning for a man of his wealth. But what if someone challenged the will's validity? What if someone claimed to have a superior right to the Mitchell fortune? What if someone claimed to be Timothy's firstborn son? The thought that had haunted me, since overhearing Lawrence's words at the restaurant, now crystallized into a specific concern. I needed to understand the legal implications of such a claim, but couldn't risk consulting our family attorney without revealing what I knew. Instead, I called Eleanor. I need another favor, I said when she answered. Your son-in-law is an estate attorney, isn't he? Jason? Yes, he's a partner at Blackwell & Hayes. Suzanne, what's going on? First the restaurant disguise, now legal questions? I need to speak with him. Hypothetically, confidentially. Eleanor sighed. I'll arrange it, but you'll owe me a full explanation soon. By the weekend, I promised. And thank you. Jason Hayes agreed to see me that afternoon, likely more out of curiosity about his mother-in-law's mysterious friend than professional interest. His downtown office offered sweeping views of Boston Harbor, a testament to his firm's success. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you have some estate questions, he began, gesturing for me to sit. Hypothetical questions, I emphasized. About inheritance challenges. His expression remained professionally neutral. I'm happy to discuss general principles with the understanding that I'm not providing specific legal advice. Of course, I composed my thoughts carefully. Hypothetically, if a wealthy man died leaving everything to his wife and son, but years later, another son emerged, perhaps a previously unknown child, what legal standing might this new son have to challenge the inheritance? Jason leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. Several factors would come into play. Was this hypothetical son born within marriage, acknowledged by the father during life? Is there DNA evidence establishing paternity? Let's say he was born simultaneously with the acknowledged son. Twins, perhaps, separated at birth. The deceased only learned of this twin shortly before death and chose not to acknowledge him. Interesting scenario. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly, professional curiosity evident. In Massachusetts, the statute of limitations for contesting a will is 1 year after probate. However, if this hypothetical twin could prove he was deliberately concealed or unaware of his rights, a court might consider an exception. And if he could prove he was technically born first, minutes before his twin, birth order between twins would be largely irrelevant to modern inheritance law, Jason explained. Unlike historical primogeniture, our current system doesn't automatically privilege firstborn children. What would matter is legal recognition and the deceased's stated intentions. I nodded, absorbing this information. And what if this hypothetical twin attempted to impersonate his deceased brother, to gain access to accounts or assets? Jason's expression sharpened. That would be criminal fraud, Mrs. Mitchell. Multiple felonies, in fact. Is there something specific concerning you about your late husband's estate? Just exploring contingencies, I replied smoothly. Timothy was always thorough in his planning. I'm trying to honor that tradition. He didn't look convinced, but respected the boundaries I'd established. If you have actual concerns about someone attempting to defraud your family's estate, I would strongly recommend consulting your regular counsel. Of course, this is purely hypothetical. We concluded our meeting with practiced social pleasantries, but as I left his office, the gravity of what I was facing settled over me. Lawrence had no legal claim to Timothy's fortune, but that clearly wasn't stopping him from pursuing it through deception and manipulation. I needed proof of what he and Paige were planning, concrete evidence I could take to authorities when the time came. My next stop was a small electronics shop in Cambridge, recommended by Eleanor's security-conscious husband. The proprietor, a former MIT researcher who introduced himself only as Gil, helped me select several discrete recording devices and small cameras that could be hidden throughout my home. Planning a nanny cam situation, Mrs. M? He asked casually as he demonstrated how to access the encrypted cloud storage where recordings would be saved. Something like that, I replied, grateful for his discretion. That evening, I methodically placed the devices throughout the house, focusing on Timothy's study, the living room where Paige always left her belongings, and the foyer. If either of them entered my home again, I would know exactly what they touched, what they said, what they planned. The final piece came Wednesday morning when I visited a private investigator recommended by Gerald Barnes as completely discreet and thoroughly effective. Winston Drake operated from an unassuming office above a hardware store in Dorchester, his reputation apparently stronger than his need for impressive surroundings. I need comprehensive information on 2 individuals, I explained, after he'd closed the door to his cluttered office. Background, current activities, associations, financial records, everything you can legally obtain. Drake nodded, making notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. Names? Lawrence Reeves, currently residing in Baltimore, though he appears to be in Boston regularly. And my daughter-in-law, Paige Mitchell. His eyebrows rose slightly at the second name, but he maintained professional composure. Family matter, I take it? You could say that. Any specific concerns I should focus on? I considered how much to reveal. Mr. Reeves appears to be my late husband's identical twin brother, separated at birth. He and my daughter-in-law have developed a relationship. I believe they may be planning something that could impact my family's financial interests. Drake wrote several more notes. Timeline for the information? As quickly as possible. Cost is no object, but discretion is paramount. They cannot know they're being investigated. Understood. He tapped his notebook. Initial report in 48 hours, comprehensive findings by early next week. Will that suffice? Yes. I handed him an envelope containing a substantial cash retainer. There's a bonus if you can determine where Mr. Reeves is staying while in Boston. Hotel records, rental agreements, property ownership, anything that establishes his local residence. As I left Drake's office, my phone chimed with a text from Paige. Thought I might stop by this afternoon to pick up that book on garden planning we discussed. Around 3? The timing was perfect. I'd just finished installing the surveillance equipment. Now I could test it while potentially gathering valuable information about their plans. I replied, that would be lovely. I'll put the kettle on. 3 o'clock. Time enough to return home and prepare not just tea, but a carefully crafted performance of my own. Lawrence and Paige thought they were dealing with a grieving widow, too blinded by loss to see their machinations. It was time to reinforce that misconception while gathering the evidence I needed to stop them. As I drove home, Timothy's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Remember what I always told you about business adversaries, Susie. Let them underestimate you. It's the surest path to victory." For once, I was grateful for the mask of fragile widowhood I'd worn these past 7 years. It was about to become my greatest asset. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I checked the newly installed camera feed on my tablet before answering. Yes, it was Paige alone on the porch, dressed in casual elegance as always. The recording system was functioning perfectly. A small green light confirmed it was capturing everything. I tucked the tablet into a drawer and smoothed my cardigan, deliberately chosen for its matronly appearance, before opening the door. "Paige, dear, right on time." I embraced her with the expected warmth of a mother-in-law, noting how she stiffened slightly before returning the gesture. Had she always been this uncomfortable with my affection, or was it a recent development since conspiring with Lawrence? "Thanks for having me over, Suzanne." She handed me a small gift bag. "I brought those artisanal teas we talked about." How thoughtful. I led her into the living room where I'd arranged a tea tray beside Timothy's favorite armchair, a deliberate stage setting. "The garden book is on the side table. I've marked a few sections that might interest you." Paige settled onto the sofa, precisely where she'd left her phone during Sunday's lunch. If she suspected I'd seen the messages, her composure revealed nothing. "How is Mark's trip going?" I asked, pouring tea with hands I forced to remain steady. "Still in Singapore?" "Hong Kong now," she replied. "The expansion is taking longer than expected. He's talking about extending another 2 weeks. Another 2 weeks of freedom for her and Lawrence. How convenient." "He works too hard," I sighed, playing my role. "Just like his father." Speaking of Timothy, Paige set down her teacup. "I found some old photos of him and Mark when I was organizing the study. I thought you might like to have them for your album." She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. As I accepted it, I noticed her studying my reaction carefully. Inside were indeed photos of Timothy and Mark, fishing trips, baseball games, moments I remembered well. But there was also one I didn't recognize. Timothy standing beside a building I didn't know, dated just weeks before his death. The photo had a slightly different quality than our family snapshots, almost like surveillance footage. "This one," I said, holding it up. "I don't recall it." Paige leaned forward with practiced casualness. "It was with the others. Perhaps from one of his business trips?" The photo was a test. She was gauging whether I recognized the location, whether I knew about Timothy's secret meeting with his twin. I made a mental note to show it to the investigator. "Perhaps," I agreed, setting it aside with deliberate disinterest. "Mark has so many of his father's qualities, the same dedication to work, the same integrity. Timothy would be proud of the man he's become." "He certainly would." Paige smiled thinly. "Though sometimes I think Mark inherited his father's blindness to what's right in front of him." My teacup froze halfway to my lips. Was she deliberately taunting me? Testing boundaries? "Oh, how do you mean?" I kept my voice light, curious. "Just that both Mitchell men get so focused on their business empires that they miss what's happening in their personal lives." She shrugged elegantly. "Timothy traveled constantly during your marriage, didn't he? He built something remarkable," I replied carefully. "For all of us." "Of course." She sipped her tea, eyes watching me over the rim. "Though one wonders if he ever regretted the paths not taken, the choices made early that shaped everything after." She was fishing for information about Timothy's adoption, about what I might know regarding his birth family. I needed to appear oblivious without seeming dim-witted. "Timothy was always forward-looking," I said, selecting a butter cookie from the tray. "He believed regrets were wasted energy." She set down her cup with a deliberate click. "I've always admired that about the Mitchell family. Such certainty about your place in the world." The conversation continued in this vein, Paige probing delicately about Timothy's past, his business practices, his private documents, while I maintained the facade of an unsuspecting widow, occasionally steering us back to safer topics like her garden plans or community events. After 20 minutes, her phone chimed with a text. She glanced at it, then smiled apologetically. "I should get going. I have a meeting with my interior design client across town." Interior design client? Is that what they were calling Lawrence now? "Of course, dear. Don't forget your book." I handed her the gardening volume, noting how she barely glanced at it. The book had never been her real reason for coming. At the door, she turned with practiced concern. "Suzanne, Have you thought more about what we discussed last month? About possibly selling the vacation house in Cape Cod? Mark and I really think it's too much for you to maintain at your age. The Cape Cod property, purchased by Timothy's parents in the 1960s and worth several million in today's market. They'd been probing about that asset for months. Oh, I don't know, I sighed, injecting fragility into my voice. So many memories there. Timothy proposed to me on that beach, you know. Of course, she said, patting my arm with patronizing sympathy. Just think about it. We hate to see you burdened with these properties when you could be enjoying your retirement. After she left, I immediately reviewed the security footage. The cameras had captured everything, including a moment when Paige, thinking I was in the kitchen refreshing the teapot, had quickly examined several documents on Timothy's desk. She'd also taken photographs of the safe behind Timothy's portrait when my back was turned. I downloaded the footage to the secure cloud storage, then called Eleanor. I need access to the Cape House immediately, I told her. Can you drive me there tomorrow morning? I'll explain everything on the way. About time, Eleanor replied. I've been dying of curiosity. I'll pick you up at 8. The next piece fell into place that evening when Winston Drake called with his preliminary findings. Lawrence Reeves is staying at the Harborview Hotel, room 712, under the name Lawrence Mitchell, he reported. He's been there for approximately 3 weeks, paying in cash. Background checks confirm he and your late husband were indeed twins, adopted by different families at 6 weeks old. And his criminal history? I pressed. Extensive, though mostly charges that were dropped or resulted in probation. Identity theft, insurance fraud, investment scams targeting wealthy widows. Drake's tone conveyed professional disapproval. He appears to have a pattern of assuming identities similar to his own to gain access to others' assets. What about his connection to my daughter-in-law? They've been meeting regularly for at least 4 months, based on credit card records and phone locations. Their first documented encounter was at a charity event in Baltimore, where your son was also present. Mr. Mitchell left early for a business call. Mrs. Mitchell and Mr. Reeves were photographed in close conversation afterward. So that's how it began. Lawrence had targeted Paige specifically, knowing her connection to the Mitchell fortune. I need surveillance on both of them, I decided, and I need to know if anyone else is involved in whatever they're planning. Already in progress, Drake assured me. I should have more concrete details by Monday. One other thing, Mr. Reeves made several calls to a law firm specializing in challenging adoptions and inheritance claims, Preston and Walsh, in Baltimore. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Lawrence wasn't just planning to steal from accounts he could access. He was building a case to challenge Timothy's will entirely, to claim rights to the Mitchell fortune as Timothy's twin, or possibly something more, given his reference to being the firstborn son. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Please continue your investigation, with particular attention to any legal documents being prepared. After hanging up, I sat in Timothy's study, surrounded by the life he'd built, the legacy now under threat. For 7 years, I'd preserved everything exactly as he left it, as if keeping his physical surroundings intact could somehow keep his memory from fading. Now that preservation might help me protect everything he'd worked for. I opened his desk drawer and removed the small velvet box containing his wedding ring, the one I'd removed from his finger before his cremation. The simple gold band had always seemed too modest for a man of his wealth, but Timothy had refused to replace it, saying, "This is the ring you put on my finger, Susie. It's the only one I'll ever wear." I closed my fingers around it, drawing strength from the memory of the man who'd worn it for 43 years. "I won't let them take what you built," I whispered to the empty room. "I promise you that. Tomorrow, the Cape House." Then, armed with Drake's complete investigation, I would begin to build my counteroffensive against the pair who thought they could exploit Timothy's memory and steal his legacy from the family he'd loved. The drive to Cape Cod with Eleanor took just over an hour, the early morning traffic mercifully light. I'd promised her explanations, and as we crossed the Sagamore Bridge, I finally revealed everything. Timothy's secret twin, Lawrence's criminal background, Paige's betrayal, and their apparent plot against the Mitchell estate. "Good God," Eleanor breathed when I finished. "It's like something from one of those paperback thrillers you're always reading. Except it's happening to me." I gazed out at the familiar coastline approaching. "To my family." "What do you think they're after at the Cape House?" "It's valuable property, certainly, but they couldn't simply sell it without your signature." "I'm not sure," I admitted. But Paige has been unusually interested in it lately. There must be something there they want, or something they think they can use. The Mitchell Cape house stood on a private stretch of shoreline in Chatham, its weathered gray shingles and white trim embodying classic New England coastal charm. Timothy's parents had purchased it as a summer retreat, and we'd continued the tradition, spending every August here with Mark when he was growing up. Since Timothy's death, I'd visited only sporadically, finding the memories simultaneously precious and painful. As we pulled into the crushed shell driveway, I noticed immediately that someone had been there recently. The Boston ferns flanking the front door were freshly watered, the porch swept clean of the usual springtime pollen. "Someone's been taking care of the place," Eleanor observed, following my gaze. "The caretaker only comes monthly this time of year." I withdrew a key from my purse, a sense of unease settling over me. "And he always calls first." We entered cautiously. Everything appeared normal at first glance. The furniture still covered with protective sheets, the family photos lining the hallway untouched. But as we moved deeper into the house, subtle discrepancies emerged. A desk drawer not fully closed, a book on maritime history lying on an end table rather than in its usual place on the shelves. "Someone's been searching for something," I murmured, running my finger along the edge of Timothy's antique writing desk. The thin layer of dust showed recent disturbance. "Paige has a key, doesn't she?" Eleanor asked, examining the bookshelf with a critical eye. "Yes, for emergencies, or if they wanted to use the house for a weekend." A thought struck me. The safe. I hurried upstairs to the master bedroom. Behind a landscape painting of Chatham Harbor hung a small wall safe, less sophisticated than the one in Boston, installed decades ago by Timothy's father. Unlike the primary home safe, this one contained mostly sentimental items. My mother-in-law's jewelry, some family documents, photo albums too precious to risk in a potential coastal flooding. The painting was slightly askew. I removed it carefully, revealing the safe's dial. Would the combination still be Timothy's birthday, as Lawrence had mockingly mentioned to Paige? I tried the familiar sequence, 04C1748. The safe opened with a soft click. Everything inside appeared undisturbed at first glance. The blue velvet jewelry box containing my mother-in-law's pearls and brooches, the folder of property deeds, the small stack of photo albums. But when I removed the jewelry box, I noticed something missing from the back corner. A small manila envelope Timothy had placed there years ago, telling me it contained old family paperwork that might interest Mark someday. I'd never examined its contents, respecting Timothy's casual instruction to leave it for later. Now I desperately wished I had. "What's missing?" Eleanor asked, noting my concerned expression. "An envelope. Timothy put it here years ago. Family documents of some kind." I carefully examined the remaining contents. Nothing else appears disturbed. Could it be adoption papers? Something Lawrence might use to establish his connection to Timothy? Possibly. I closed the safe, my mind racing. But why would Timothy keep such documents here rather than with our other important papers? And why mention they might interest Mark someday rather than telling me directly what they contained? We continued our search through the house, finding subtle evidence of intrusion, but no further significant discoveries. In Timothy's small home office, the filing cabinet showed signs of having been carefully examined, though nothing obvious was missing. Whoever had searched the house, presumably Paige or Lawrence, had been methodical and cautious. "Let's check the boathouse," I suggested, as we completed our interior inspection. Timothy kept some old family memorabilia out there. The small boathouse stood at the edge of the property, overlooking the private beach. Timothy had converted part of it into a casual space for summer entertaining, with nautical decorations and comfortable furniture. Along one wall stood antique cabinets containing fishing gear, maritime instruments, and boxes of Mitchell family vacation photos dating back to Timothy's childhood. As we approached, I noticed fresh footprints in the sand leading to the boathouse door. Definitely not the caretaker, who always accessed it from the lawn path. Inside, the disruption was more evident than in the main house. Cabinet doors stood ajar, photo boxes had been opened and hastily restacked, and an old sea chest containing Timothy's father's naval memorabilia had been thoroughly examined, its contents not quite returned to their original arrangement. "They were less careful here," Eleanor observed. "Perhaps they felt more secluded, less likely to be noticed." I knelt beside the sea chest, examining what remained. The chest contained William Mitchell's Navy discharge papers, medals from his service in Korea, photographs of his ship and crew. Nothing that would seem relevant to Lawrence's scheme, unless the adoption, I murmured, a new theory forming. Timothy's father was in the Navy when he and his wife adopted him. Military adoptions sometimes involve different procedures, different documentation. You think Lawrence is looking for information about the adoption itself? Something he could use to challenge its legality? It's possible. I carefully replaced the items in the chest. If he could somehow prove Timothy's adoption wasn't properly executed, he might try to claim Timothy wasn't legally a Mitchell and therefore had no right to the Mitchell family assets. That seems far-fetched, Eleanor said skeptically. After all these decades? To a legitimate court, perhaps. But Lawrence doesn't need to win an actual legal battle. He just needs leverage, enough of a claim to pressure me into a settlement, or to create sufficient confusion that he can access accounts during the dispute. I closed the chest carefully, and he's using Paige to gain inside information and access to our properties while Mark is conveniently away. We completed our search without finding any further clues to what specific documents Lawrence might have taken. As we prepared to leave, I paused in the driveway, looking back at the house that held so many family memories now tainted by this intrusion. They've been here, searching methodically, I said with grim certainty, and they found something they believed valuable enough to take, possibly documents related to Timothy's adoption or birth family. Eleanor squeezed my arm supportively. What's your next move? Wait for the investigator's complete report on Monday. Then, I took a deep breath, determination replacing the shock and hurt that had dominated the past few days. Then I start fighting back. Timothy protected our family while he lived. Now it's my turn. Monday morning brought rain, a steady, penetrating downpour that matched my mood as I waited in Winston Drake's cramped office. The investigator was running late, his assistant explained apologetically, due to an unexpected development in your case. Those words had done nothing to calm my churning thoughts. When Drake finally arrived, rainwater dripping from his overcoat, his expression confirmed my concern. Without preamble, he placed a thick folder on the desk between us. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to prepare you. What we've uncovered goes beyond what we initially suspected. My stomach tightened. Tell me. Drake opened the folder, revealing a series of photographs documenting Lawrence and Paige together, entering the Harborview Hotel, dining at various restaurants, walking through the public garden. The intimacy between them was undeniable. Their relationship appears to have begun approximately 6 months ago, not 4, as I initially reported. Mrs. Mitchell made several trips to Baltimore last fall, ostensibly for interior design conferences. I nodded, remembering Paige's supposed professional development trips Mark had encouraged, even funded. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. What about their plans regarding the Mitchell estate? Drake removed several document copies from the folder. This is where it becomes complicated. We've confirmed Lawrence Reeves has engaged Preston and Walsh to prepare legal challenges on multiple fronts. First, a petition questioning the validity of your late husband's adoption, as I suspected from their interest in the Cape House documents. Yes, but there's more. Drake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. They're also preparing a motion suggesting Timothy Mitchell was not, in fact, deceased. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Based on our surveillance of their conversations and documents, they're planning to claim Timothy Mitchell faked his own death 7 years ago for insurance fraud purposes and has been living under an assumed identity, explaining Lawrence's identical appearance and apparent familiarity with Mitchell family matters. The audacity of the claim left me momentarily speechless. I had identified Timothy's body, had arranged his cremation, had mourned him every day for 7 years. That's absurd, I finally managed. There was a body, a death certificate, medical records, which is why they've also been investigating the medical examiner who processed your husband's case, a Dr. Collins who, conveniently, retired to Arizona 5 years ago and has early-stage dementia. Drake's expression was grave. They don't need to prove these claims definitively in court. They just need to create enough confusion to freeze the Mitchell assets during litigation. Creating an opportunity to siphon funds during the chaos, I concluded, the strategy becoming clear. Timothy had taught me enough about hostile business takeovers to recognize the tactic. Create sufficient disruption that normal protections falter, then extract value during the confusion. Exactly. But there's something else. Drake removed a final document from the folder, a birth certificate. This required significant digging. Lawrence and Timothy weren't just twins. According to this, they were triplets. Triplets! I stared at the yellowed certificate copy, which listed 3 male infants born to Elizabeth Winters on April 17, 1948. There was a third brother, Thomas Winters. He remained with the birth mother, while the other 2 were placed for adoption. He died at age 22 in a motorcycle accident. Drake tapped the document. Here's where it gets relevant to their scheme. Lawrence is planning to claim he is actually Thomas Winters, the only legitimate son who remained with the birth mother, and that Timothy and Lawrence were the adopted ones. The complexity of the deception was staggering. But why? What advantage does claiming to be Thomas give him? Because Elizabeth Winters came from money, old Boston money that disappeared under mysterious circumstances around the time the triplets were born. Lawrence has documents suggesting Timothy discovered this inheritance, claimed it secretly, and used it to build Mitchell Holdings, effectively stealing his birth family's fortune. My head spun with the implications. This wasn't just about accessing offshore accounts or challenging Timothy's will. This was a comprehensive attack on the very foundation of the Mitchell fortune, designed to create so many simultaneous legal questions that normal probate protections would be overwhelmed. None of this is true, I said firmly, though my voice wavered slightly. Timothy built his company from nothing. His success came from intelligence and hard work, not some secret inheritance. I believe you, Drake assured me, but their narrative is crafted to be just plausible enough to initiate legal proceedings. They have some compelling documentation, though I suspect much of it has been fabricated. What about the envelope from the Cape House safe? Do we know what it contained? Based on conversations we've recorded, it appears to have included Timothy's original birth certificate and some correspondence between the adoption agency and the Mitchells. Lawrence is using these to support his claims about the birth family's hidden wealth. I absorbed this information, my initial shock giving way to calculating anger. When are they planning to initiate these legal challenges? Within 2 weeks, according to their communications. They're waiting for final documentation from a private investigator they've hired to look into Elizabeth Winters' financial history. Drake hesitated. There's one more thing you should know. Your son's travel schedule has been deliberately manipulated. What do you mean? Several business complications that have extended his time abroad appear to have been orchestrated. Page has a contact at his company's overseas office who has been creating artificial problems requiring your son's continued presence. So Mark's extended absence was part of their scheme, keeping him far from home while they prepared to destroy his inheritance and family legacy. The calculated nature of their betrayal made my blood boil. What about the legal team at Mitchell Holdings? Shouldn't they have some strategy for defending against these kinds of challenges? They would, if they were aware of them. But according to our surveillance, Lawrence and Page plan to file these challenges simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions, creating immediate freezes on assets before your corporate counsel can coordinate a response. I sat back, momentarily overwhelmed by the scope of what we were facing. Then Timothy's voice seemed to whisper in my memory. Business is chess, not checkers, Susie. Always think 5 moves ahead. Mr. Drake, I said, my voice steadying as determination replaced shock. I need everything you have on Lawrence's fabricated documentation, every claim they're preparing, every falsified record, every conversation you've recorded, and I need to know exactly where they're keeping their evidence. Already compiled, he confirmed, patting the folder. But Mrs. Mitchell, given the seriousness of these developments, I must recommend involving law enforcement. Not yet, I decided. If we move too soon, we risk them destroying evidence or altering their strategy. I need time to prepare our counterattack. I met his gaze directly. And I need your continued discretion. Drake studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You'll have it, but please be careful. People willing to construct elaborate fraud like this may be capable of more direct methods if they feel cornered. As I left his office clutching the damning folder, the rain had intensified to a thunderstorm. Lightning flashed over the harbor, illuminating the city my husband had loved, the legacy he had built, the family name these conspirators sought to tarnish and exploit. They had spent months meticulously building their scheme, targeting my family, while we remained oblivious. They thought they were facing a grieving widow and an absent son. Instead, they would face me, and I was done playing the role of the unsuspecting victim. Friday evening found me once again at La Maison, though this time I made no attempt to disguise my presence. I'd reserved Timothy's favorite table, the one with the best view of both the harbor and the restaurant's entrance. From this vantage point, I could see every patron who arrived, while remaining perfectly visible myself. Lawrence and Paige had a standing weekly reservation here. According to Drake's surveillance, they used these dinners to review their progress and refine their strategies, comfortable in the belief that I was safely unaware at home. Tonight, that calculation would prove catastrophically wrong. I arrived early, dressed in one of Timothy's favorite outfits, a midnight blue dress he'd given me for our 40th anniversary, accented with the sapphire jewelry set that had been his final gift before his death. The maitre d', who had known us for decades, welcomed me with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Mitchell, how wonderful to see you again. Your usual table is ready." "Thank you, Antoine. I'm expecting to see some family members tonight. They may be surprised to find me here." His professional expression revealed nothing, but the slight inclination of his head suggested understanding. "Of course, madam, we are at your service." I ordered a glass of Timothy's preferred Cabernet and settled in to wait. At precisely 8 o'clock, they arrived. Lawrence in a charcoal suit nearly identical to one Timothy had owned, Paige in another elegant black dress, her arm linked comfortably through his. The intimacy in their body language was unmistakable. They didn't notice me immediately, too absorbed in their conversation as Antoine led them to their usual table, directly in my line of sight. It was Paige who saw me first, her step faltering mid-stride, her face draining of color so rapidly I thought she might faint. Lawrence, still oblivious, continued speaking until he registered her shock. He turned, following her gaze, and for the first time, I faced my husband's identical twin brother directly, without subterfuge between us. The resemblance was even more striking up close, the same silver-touched dark hair, the same jawline and brow. Even his posture echoed Timothy's, but the eyes, cold, calculating, betrayed the profound difference between them. This man might wear Timothy's face, but he carried none of his soul. I raised my wine glass in a small salute, the diamond on my wedding finger catching the light deliberately. "Good evening." Paige recovered first, her social training kicking in automatically. "Suzanne, what a surprise. Is it?" I took a deliberate sip of wine, my gaze unwavering. "I thought La Maison was the perfect setting for our overdue family reunion. Won't you join me?" The challenge hung in the air between us. Around us, other diners continued their meals, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Lawrence's expression shifted from shock to wariness to calculated charm with remarkable speed. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said smoothly, using Timothy's voice with practiced precision. "This is certainly unexpected." "I imagine it is." I gestured to the empty chairs at my table. "Please, we have so much to discuss." For a moment, I thought they might flee. Paige's eyes darted toward the exit, but Lawrence, evidently deciding retreat would only confirm guilt, guided her toward my table with a confident hand at her back. "I believe introductions are in order," I said, once they'd seated themselves. "You must be Lawrence Reeves, or perhaps you prefer Thomas Winters these days. I find it hard to keep track of which identity you're using." The flash of alarm in his eyes confirmed Drake's intelligence was accurate. "I don't know what you're talking about," he responded smoothly. "My name is Lawrence Mitchell. I'm Timothy's twin brother." "Yes, I'm aware." I smiled without warmth. "What I'm curious about is why you've chosen to pursue a romantic relationship with my daughter-in-law while plotting to challenge my family's assets through fraudulent legal claims." Paige made a small, strangled sound. Lawrence's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. "You seem confused, Mrs. Mitchell. Understandably, given your age and recent emotional difficulties. My age and emotional state are perfectly sound, thank you." I opened the small portfolio I'd brought and removed several photographs, surveillance images of them together, including one taken at the Cape House. "As is my awareness of your activities over the past 6 months." Lawrence's confidence wavered visibly. "These prove nothing except that I've been helping Paige through a difficult time in her marriage. Mark's constant absences have been hard on her. Absences that have been deliberately extended through your contact at Mitchell International's Singapore office," I countered, removing another document from my portfolio, evidence Drake had compiled of their manipulation of Mark's travel schedule. Paige paled further. "Suzanne, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice low but clear. I understand that you've been searching my home while I was out, accessing Timothy's safe, and stealing family documents from our Cape property. I understand you've engaged Preston and Walsh to prepare multiple fraudulent legal challenges to the Mitchell estate based on fabricated claims about Timothy's birth family. Lawrence's charming facade slipped further, calculation replacing it. You have no proof of any illegal activity. No? I withdrew my final piece of evidence, transcripts of their conversations at La Maison, captured by the directional microphone during my earlier surveillance. Your exact words to Paige: "Once we have the account numbers verified, we can move to phase 2. 4 more weeks, darling, and Timothy's fortune will be where it always should have been, with his firstborn son." I met his gaze directly. Except you weren't the firstborn, were you? You were actually the last born of the triplets, by 17 minutes, according to the birth records. The shock on his face confirmed he hadn't known this detail. You're bluffing. I never bluff, I replied calmly. Timothy taught me that. In business and in life, bluffing indicates a position of weakness. I'm not weak, Mr. Reeves, and I'm not the oblivious widow you believed you were targeting. Lawrence recovered quickly, his expression hardening into something ugly and familiar, the face of a cornered predator. What exactly do you want? Money to keep quiet? A settlement? I want you to understand exactly what's happening, I said, closing my portfolio deliberately. As we speak, everything we've said is being recorded, adding to the substantial evidence already compiled. Your hotel room at the Harborview is currently being searched under warrant by Boston police, who are particularly interested in the fraudulent documents you've been preparing. Paige gasped audibly. You can't— I already have, I interrupted. Detective James Morelli, an old family friend, has been extremely interested in the evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grand larceny I provided yesterday. He was especially concerned about the falsified medical records you plan to use to challenge Timothy's death certificate. Lawrence leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with, old woman. I've beaten charges before, and accidents can happen to elderly widows, particularly those with cognitive decline. The threat hung in the air between us, but instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. That sounded remarkably like a threat, Mr. Reeves. Perhaps you'd care to rephrase for the recording. His eyes darted to my sapphire pendant, suddenly recognizing it might contain more than decorative stones. Before he could respond, Antoine approached the table, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers I recognized from yesterday's meeting with Detective Morelli. Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Mitchell, one said quietly. We need you both to come with us. Please keep your hands visible as you stand. Lawrence's expression transformed into pure hatred as he realized the trap had closed around him. This isn't over, he hissed at me as the officers secured his hands behind his back. Actually, I replied calmly, gathering my portfolio, it is, just not the way you planned. As they were led away, Lawrence in silent fury, Paige in visible shock, I remained seated, Timothy's favorite wine still half full before me. The other patrons had finally noticed the drama, whispers and curious glances sweeping through the restaurant like wind through summer grass. I raised my glass toward Timothy's memory, toward the life we'd built that this man had tried to steal. Checkmate, I whispered, and finished my wine. Detective Morelli's office felt smaller than I remembered from yesterday's meeting, perhaps because it now contained 4 people instead of 2. Mark sat beside me, his face drawn with exhaustion and shock after the emergency flight home from Hong Kong. Across from us, Morelli reviewed his notes while a department psychologist observed quietly from the corner. I still can't believe it, Mark murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. 7 years I've been married to her, and I never suspected. I squeezed his hand gently. She was very careful. They both were. After Lawrence and Paige's arrest last night, I'd made the call I'd been dreading, waking my son halfway around the world to tell him his wife had been arrested for conspiracy and fraud in collusion with his deceased father's secret twin brother. The disbelief in his voice had been painful to hear. Mrs. Mitchell has provided us with extensive evidence, Morelli explained, addressing Mark directly. The search of Mr. Reeves's hotel room yielded additional documentation supporting the charges, including falsified medical records and court filings prepared for multiple jurisdictions. And Paige was part of this from the beginning? Mark's voice cracked slightly. She deliberately, with a man who looks exactly like Dad. The psychological cruelty of that particular detail hadn't escaped any of us. Paige hadn't just betrayed Mark with another man. She'd chosen someone with his father's face, creating a perversion of family bonds that added another layer of trauma to the betrayal. Based on the evidence and their initial statements, it appears Mrs. Mitchell was approached by Mr. Reeves approximately 6 months ago, Morelli continued. He had identified her as a potential access point to the Mitchell family and assets. She could have said no, Mark said bitterly. She could have told me immediately. The psychologist spoke for the first time. People who are successfully targeted by manipulators like Mr. Reeves often have pre-existing vulnerabilities or resentments that are exploited. This doesn't excuse their actions, but helps explain the progression. What vulnerabilities? Mark demanded. We have a good marriage. I've given her everything. I hesitated, then spoke carefully. Except your presence, Mark. You've been gone more than you've been home this past year. His face flushed with defensive anger, then crumpled in recognition. I thought I was building our future. The Asian expansion was supposed to secure my position, provide for our family. Mr. Reeves appears to have recognized and exploited that absence, Morelli noted, and Mrs. Mitchell has indicated in preliminary questioning that she felt increasingly isolated and unappreciated. So she decided to steal my family's money and run off with a criminal who looks like my dead father? Mark's voice rose sharply. That's her justification? There's no justification, I said firmly. Only context. Paige made terrible, criminal choices, but understanding the vulnerabilities that allowed Lawrence to manipulate her might help you process what's happened. Mark fell silent, absorbing this. After a moment, he asked, "What happens now?" Both defendants remain in custody, Morelli explained. Given the scope of the attempted fraud and Mr. Reeves's prior criminal history, we anticipate significant charges. Mrs. Mitchell will likely face lesser charges due to her cooperation, but still serious ones. She's cooperating? Mark looked up, surprise momentarily replacing anger. Since this morning, Morelli confirmed. After initial denials, she's provided substantial information about Mr. Reeves's activities and plans. Her attorney is likely seeking a plea arrangement. I wasn't surprised. Paige had always been practical above all else. Once caught, cutting a deal would be her logical move. We'll need both of you to provide formal statements, Morelli continued, and you should be prepared for this case to receive media attention, given the Mitchell family's prominence. Mark nodded mechanically, still processing the destruction of his marriage and the bizarre circumstances surrounding it. What about Dad's twin? The documents they stole from Mom's safe? Morelli glanced at his notes. The birth certificate and adoption records appear genuine. Timothy Mitchell was indeed adopted, and he did have identical triplet brothers. However, the claims about Elizabeth Winters's supposed fortune were entirely fabricated by Mr. Reeves. Our financial investigators have found no evidence of any significant Winters family wealth. So Dad really did build everything from nothing, Mark said, a note of fierce pride breaking through his shock, just like he always told us. Yes, I confirmed, relief washing through me at this vindication of Timothy's legacy. Everything we have, he earned through his own intelligence and hard work. The detective closed his notebook. We'll need you both back tomorrow to formalize your statements. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. This is a lot to process. As we left the police station, reporters had already begun to gather, tipped off to the story of identical twins, betrayal, and attempted fraud involving one of Boston's prominent families. Mark instinctively moved closer to me, shielding me from their shouted questions as we made our way to the waiting car. You'll stay at the house tonight? I asked as we pulled away from the curb. Yes, he stared out the window at the familiar Boston streets. I can't face our apartment right now. Not with everything she's touched, everything she's lied about. We rode in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Why didn't Dad ever tell us? About being adopted? About having brothers? I've been asking myself the same question, I admitted. Based on what we've learned, it seems he only discovered Lawrence's existence shortly before his death. The meeting didn't go well. Because Lawrence was jealous of Dad's success? That's my guess. Timothy must have decided Lawrence was potentially harmful to our family and chose to protect us by keeping his existence secret. I sighed, the weight of this revelation still settling on me. I wish he'd trusted me with the truth. He was always trying to protect everyone, Mark said softly, taking care of problems himself instead of burdening others. A trait Mark had inherited, I realized. His constant work, his determination to handle everything alone, his reluctance to share struggles. As we turned onto our street, Mark asked the question I'd been dreading. Did you suspect Paige before? Was there something I should have seen? No, I answered truthfully. I knew she was unhappy with your absences, but I never imagined this level of betrayal. Lawrence was very skilled at manipulation, and they were extremely careful. Until she left her phone on your sofa, he noted with bitter irony. Everyone makes mistakes eventually, I replied, especially people juggling elaborate deceptions. We pulled into the driveway of the home that had nearly been stolen from us through fraud and manipulation. As we entered, I watched Mark take in the familiar surroundings with new eyes, the safety of childhood home now complicated by the knowledge of how close we'd come to losing everything, not just property and money, but the very truth of our family history. You saved us, Mom, he said suddenly, turning to me with an expression of dawning realization. If you hadn't discovered what they were planning, I protected what your father built for us, I replied simply, just as he would have done. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something beyond shock, betrayal, and grim determination. A sense that though our family had been attacked, we had emerged stronger, more aware of both our vulnerabilities and our strengths. And perhaps, most importantly, with a deeper understanding of Timothy's legacy, not just the material wealth he'd created, but the resilience and clarity he'd instilled in those he loved. The media storm hit with predictable ferocity. By Monday morning, every Boston newspaper featured some variation of the same sensational headline: Mitchell family targeted in twin deception. Television vans parked at the end of our driveway, reporters clustered at the gates of Mitchell Holdings, and our phones rang constantly with calls from journalists seeking comment. Mark and I retreated into privacy, issuing a brief statement through the family attorney requesting respect during this difficult time. Inside the quiet sanctuary of our home, we began the painful process of understanding exactly what had happened and why. I've been going through the documents Detective Morelli returned, Mark said, spreading papers across Timothy's desk. The ones Lawrence stole from the Cape House safe. I joined him, examining the yellowed papers that had set this entire nightmare in motion. The original birth certificate confirmed what we now knew. Timothy had been born a triplet, 17 minutes after Thomas and 4 minutes before Lawrence. Their mother, Elizabeth Winters, was listed as single, father unknown. Why didn't Dad ever mention being adopted? Mark wondered, tracing his finger over the certificate. It wouldn't have changed anything about how I saw him. For his generation, adoption carried different stigmas, I explained. And Timothy was raised as a Mitchell from infancy. It was the only identity he knew. His parents rarely discussed his adoption. Still, finding out you have identical brothers, that's significant. I nodded, turning to the next document. Correspondence between the adoption agency and William and Eleanor Mitchell, Timothy's adoptive parents. The letter was dated March 1948, just before the adoption was finalized. The mother insisted the triplets be separated, I read aloud. She believed raising them together would create too much strain on any one family, given her circumstances. Her circumstances? Mark frowned. What does that mean? I'm not sure. I continued reading through the sparse documentation. There's nothing here explaining why she kept Thomas, but gave up Timothy and Lawrence for adoption. The final document was the most revealing, a private investigator's report commissioned by Timothy just months before his death. It detailed his search for information about his birth family and the discovery of his identical brothers. Thomas died in 1970, Mark noted, reading over my shoulder. Motorcycle accident. And Lawrence was raised by the Reeves family in Baltimore, apparently with significantly fewer advantages than Dad. The report included background checks on Lawrence Reeves, revealing a troubled youth and early brushes with the law. What struck me most forcefully was the investigator's assessment. Subject exhibits concerning patterns of antisocial behavior and identity-related fraud. Caution advised regarding any potential contact. Dad went ahead and met him anyway, I murmured, despite the warning. That sounds like him, Mark said with a sad smile, always believing he could solve any problem through direct engagement. The final page was a handwritten note from Timothy, dated 1 week after his meeting with Lawrence. It was addressed to me, though I'd never seen it before. Susie, if you're reading this, something has happened to me before I could share this with you directly. I recently discovered I have a brother, identical in appearance but nothing else. Our meeting confirmed my investigator's concerns. Lawrence is troubled, resentful, and potentially dangerous. He blames me for having advantages he was denied, though neither of us had any control over our adoptions. I've decided not to introduce him to our family. Some connections are better left unexplored. I've instructed my attorney to monitor Lawrence discreetly and ensure he stays far from you and Mark. Please destroy this letter after reading it. Some truths serve no purpose but to worry those we love. All my heart. Timothy. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. 7 years too late, I finally understood. Timothy had been protecting us, as always, but his unexpected death had prevented him from implementing whatever safeguards he'd planned, leaving his attorney unaware of the threat Lawrence posed. Dad knew, Mark said quietly. He met Lawrence, recognized the danger, and tried to shield us from it. And when he died suddenly, his precautions died with him. I folded the letter carefully. Lawrence must have monitored obituaries, realized his opportunity, and spent years planning how to exploit Timothy's identity and our family's resources, using Paige as his access point. Mark's expression hardened. I still can't believe she... He broke off, emotion choking his words. The doorbell interrupted us. Through the security monitor, I recognized Detective Morelli standing on the porch, his expression grave. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell. He greeted us moments later in the foyer. I apologize for coming unannounced, but there's been a development I thought you should hear from me directly. What's happened? I asked, leading him to the living room. Lawrence Reeves was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparently he committed the act against himself. Mark sank into a chair. He did this to himself? He used bedsheets fashioned into a ligature, Morelli explained clinically. The preliminary investigation suggests he acted alone, though of course, a full inquiry is underway. I felt a complex wave of emotions, shock, a certain grim relief that Lawrence could no longer threaten our family, and an unexpected flicker of grief for the brother Timothy never really had the chance to know. And Paige? Mark asked, his voice strained. She is under surveillance to prevent her from doing the same as Lawrence, as a precaution, but she appears stable. Her cooperation continues, and her lawyer is finalizing a plea bargain. Given these developments, she will likely receive a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony about Mr. Reeves's activities. After Morelli left, promising updates as the investigation continued, Mark and I sat in stunned silence, processing this final dark twist. It's over, I said finally. Not the way anyone would have wanted, but it's over. Mark shook his head slowly. Not entirely. The legal proceedings with Paige will continue. The media attention. The questions about our family history. He looked up, his expression troubled. And we still don't know everything. Why did Elizabeth Winters keep Thomas but give up Dad and Lawrence? What happened to her? Dad's investigator clearly found something about her circumstances, but those details aren't here. His investigative instinct, inherited from Timothy, was asserting itself, seeking completeness even in tragedy. Perhaps some questions don't need answers, I suggested gently. Timothy chose not to pursue this further for a reason. Dad didn't know Lawrence would target our family after his death, Mark countered. I need to understand everything to be sure this is truly finished. No more surprises, no more unknown relatives with claims or grievances. I recognized the determination in his eyes, the same expression Timothy would get when facing a challenging business problem. And perhaps he was right. Timothy had tried to protect us through secrecy, but incomplete knowledge had ultimately left us vulnerable. What do you propose? I asked. I want to hire Drake to finish what Dad started. Complete background on Elizabeth Winters. Full investigation into whether there are any other relatives or claims we should be aware of. His expression softened slightly. With your permission, of course. This affects you too. I considered this, weighing Timothy's protective instinct against our recent experiences. Timothy wanted to shield us from painful truths, I said slowly. But I think recent events have proven that full awareness, however difficult, is ultimately safer than protective ignorance. Mark nodded, relief evident in his posture. Then we'll proceed, together. As evening fell, we continued examining the documents that had set this tragedy in motion, piecing together the fragmented history of Timothy's origins. There was a certain healing in this shared investigation. Mother and son united in understanding the man who had connected us, whose absence had shaped the past 7 years, and whose legacy had nearly been stolen through elaborate deception. I miss him, Mark said suddenly, looking up at Timothy's portrait above the fireplace. Even after 7 years, I still expect him to walk through the door sometimes, ready to solve whatever problem we're facing. In a way, he did, I replied softly, touching the letter Timothy had written. He tried to warn us, to protect us, even knowing he might not be here. Outside, the media vans had finally departed as darkness fell. The immediate sensation had passed, replaced by the quieter, more enduring process of healing and understanding that lay ahead. Timothy's final message to me had ended with a sentiment I now recognized as his most profound legacy. Some truths serve no purpose but to worry those we love. He had tried to shield us from painful knowledge out of love. Now, our task was to find the balance between honoring that protective impulse and ensuring we never again remained vulnerable through ignorance. 6 months passed. The media storm around the Mitchell twin deception gradually subsided as newer scandals captured public attention. Paige accepted a plea agreement, receiving a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole after 2 years in exchange for her complete cooperation in untangling Lawrence's elaborate scheme. Mark filed for divorce, a process that proceeded with surprising civility given the circumstances. Through it all, we worked with Winston Drake to complete the investigation Timothy had begun, and this time, we left no stone unturned. On a crisp autumn afternoon, remarkably similar to the day 7 years ago when I'd lost Timothy, Drake arrived at the house with his final report. Mark had flown in from Singapore specifically for this meeting, having taken a more balanced approach to his international responsibilities in recent months. This represents everything we've been able to uncover about Timothy's birth family, Drake explained as we settled in Timothy's study. It's been challenging, given the age of the records and the deliberate obfuscation surrounding the triplets' birth, but I believe we've assembled a comprehensive picture. He opened a thick folder containing documents, photographs, and extensive notes. Elizabeth Winters came from a prominent Boston family, though not a particularly wealthy one, contrary to Lawrence's claims. Her father was a respected academic, her mother from declining New England aristocracy, more social standing than actual fortune. So Lawrence's claims about family wealth were fabricated, Mark confirmed. Entirely, Drake agreed. However, the circumstances surrounding the triplets' birth were more complex than we initially understood. He removed a photograph from the folder, a striking young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes that strongly resembled Timothy's. Elizabeth Winters was 22 when she became pregnant. Unmarried and from a family concerned with appearances, this created an immediate crisis. Not uncommon for that era, I noted. No, but there's more. Drake hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The father of the triplets was Robert Mitchell, Timothy's adoptive father's younger brother. The revelation hit like a physical blow. What? Robert Mitchell was married to someone else at the time, a politically advantageous union his family had arranged. His affair with Elizabeth Winters was brief, but resulted in her pregnancy. When the Mitchell family discovered the situation, they orchestrated an elaborate solution to avoid scandal. Mark leaned forward intently. So Dad wasn't just adopted by the Mitchells, he was actually biologically related to them? He was a Mitchell by blood? Yes, Drake confirmed. The adoption was essentially a cover story to legitimize his existence without exposing the affair. Robert and his wife raised Lawrence, maintaining the fiction that he was their biological child. William and Eleanor Mitchell, Robert's brother and sister-in-law, adopted Timothy as their own, having been unable to conceive. And Elizabeth kept Thomas, moving to western Massachusetts to escape scrutiny. But why separate triplets? I asked, troubled by the clinical calculation evident in these arrangements. Multiple factors, Drake explained. Triplets would have been nearly impossible to explain as a natural occurrence within the established marriages. And Elizabeth insisted on keeping at least one of her children, while the Mitchell family demanded custody of the others to ensure their proper upbringing within the family. The cruel efficiency of the arrangement left me momentarily speechless. 3 identical boys, separated by adult machinations, their lives set on dramatically different trajectories from infancy. Thomas died young, Mark reminded us. Did he ever know about his brothers? There's no evidence he did, Drake replied. Elizabeth Winters never remarried. She raised Thomas alone until his death in the motorcycle accident at age 22. She passed away in 1983 from cancer, having never publicly acknowledged the existence of Timothy or Lawrence. And Robert Mitchell, the biological father? I asked. He and his wife raised Lawrence in Baltimore, where Robert managed Mitchell family business interests. By all accounts, it was a cold, status-conscious household. Robert died in 1976, his wife in 1981. Lawrence left home at 17 and had minimal contact with his adoptive parents afterward. So Dad was raised by his biological uncle and aunt, who treated him as their beloved son, while Lawrence was raised by his actual biological father, who apparently was distant and critical, Mark summarized. The psychological impact of those different environments likely explains much about their divergent paths, Drake agreed. Timothy grew up secure in his parents' love, while Lawrence experienced rejection from the same biological father who had arranged his life. I thought of Lawrence, twisted by resentment and envy, seeing Timothy as the embodiment of everything he'd been denied. The tragedy of their separation and the vastly different lives that resulted felt overwhelming. Did Timothy know any of this? I asked, when he discovered Lawrence's existence. Drake shook his head. Based on the records we found, including Timothy's investigator's notes, it appears he only discovered he was adopted and had identical brothers. There's no indication he knew Robert Mitchell was his biological father, or that he was actually blood-related to the family that raised him. Mark stood and walked to the window, his profile remarkably like his father's as he processed this information. So, Lawrence's claim about being the firstborn son wasn't entirely fabrication. He was technically the firstborn of the triplets, and he was raised by their biological father, though as an adoptive son, not acknowledged as biological. Correct, Drake confirmed. Though his legal claims were still fraudulent, there was a kernel of truth that fueled his resentment and sense of entitlement. I thought about Timothy, my Timothy, learning of his brother's existence and attempting to forge a connection, only to encounter Lawrence's festering resentment. Had he suspected the deeper truth about his parentage? Had he chosen to protect us from knowledge that would complicate our understanding of the Mitchell family legacy? Is there anyone else? I asked Drake. Any other relatives or claimants we should be aware of? No, he assured me. Thomas died without children. Lawrence never had children. Elizabeth Winters had no other offspring. This particular chapter of Mitchell family history ends with Timothy and continues through Mark. We thanked Drake for his thoroughness, and after he departed, Mark and I sat in Timothy's study, surrounded by the documentation of a family secret spanning 3 generations. What do we do with this information? Mark asked finally. I considered the question carefully. The truth was complex, painful, and yet somehow vindicating. Timothy had been a Mitchell by blood all along, though not in the way anyone had understood. We integrate it into our understanding of who we are, I replied. The Mitchell legacy isn't just about business success or social position. It's about choices, how William and Eleanor chose to love Timothy as their own, how Timothy chose to build something meaningful from that foundation, how you're choosing to continue that legacy while learning from the past. Mark nodded slowly. And how you chose to fight for that legacy when it was threatened. We fell silent, each absorbed in our thoughts. Outside, autumn leaves drifted from the maple trees Timothy had planted decades ago. Time continued its inevitable progression, carrying us forward while connecting us to the past through invisible threads of DNA, choice, and love. I'd like to visit the graves, Mark said suddenly. All of them. Elizabeth, Thomas, even Lawrence. To acknowledge what happened. To understand where we came from. The request surprised me, yet felt right. I think that would be appropriate. A way to honor the complete truth, however complicated. Later that evening, as Mark returned to his hotel to prepare for his flight back to Singapore the following day, I sat alone in Timothy's study, surrounded by the evidence of a family history far more complex than I'd ever imagined during our 43 years of marriage. I opened the drawer containing Timothy's wedding ring, the gold band I'd removed before his cremation. Beside it now lay the letter he'd written, warning me about Lawrence, the warning that had arrived too late, yet ultimately helped us understand the danger we'd faced. You tried to protect us, I whispered to his portrait, even from truths you thought might hurt us, but in the end, it was truth that saved us. I closed the drawer gently, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since finding that shocking message on Paige's phone 6 months ago. The Mitchell family legacy would continue, now enriched rather than diminished by the complete understanding of its origins. Timothy's life hadn't been a fiction as Lawrence had tried to claim. It had been authentic in all the ways that truly mattered, built on love, integrity, and purpose. The revelation of his biological connection to the Mitchell name only confirmed what I'd always known. He had been exactly who he appeared to be, a man worthy of the name he carried and the family he created. And in the end, that was the truth that mattered most.